This episode of Fearless Rebel Radio is brought to you by You on Fire. You on Fire is the amazing 12-week online group coaching program that I run, where we build up your worth from the ground up so that it's no longer hinging on the way that you look. It's got personalized coaching from me and incredible community support, plus lifetime access. Get details on what's included in this program and sign up to be notified when doors open for the next cycle by going to summerinanen.com/you on fire. I would love to have you in that program and in that group. This is Fearless Rebel Radio, a podcast about body positivity, self-worth, anti-dieting, and feminism. I am your host, Summer Inanen, a professionally trained coach specializing in body image, self-worth, and confidence, and the best-selling author of Body Image Remix. If you're ready to break free of societal standards and stop living behind the number on your scale, then you have come to the right place. Welcome to the show. This is episode 126, and I am interviewing Isaiah Bartlett, a queer trans radical therapist, about his struggles with body image, the intersection between gender dysphoria and body image, and advice on building body trust and healing. You can find all the links and resources mentioned in this episode at summerinanen.com/126. Before we begin, let me give a shout out to this amazing podcast listener who left this review. This podcast puts into words explanations for and connections to thoughts and feelings I could never understand. The perspectives and stories are so real and fun and give validation to my own story. Thank you. Thank you so much for that amazing review. I'm going to try and pronounce this. I think it's Late Mom, something like that. Thank you so much for that amazing review. I really appreciate it. Leaving a review helps others to find the show and the information you're learning here. And it helps to contribute to the revolution to end diet culture. So you can do that by heading to iTunes, searching for Fearless Rebel Radio, then click ratings and reviews and click to leave a review or give it a rating. And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the show via iTunes or whatever platform you use. Lastly, don't forget to grab the free 10-day body confidence makeover at summerinanen.com/freebies with 10 steps to take right now to feel better in your body. Or go to thebodyimagecoach.com, which will link to my website and give you everything you need to know. Today's guest is Isaiah Bartlett, LCSW, a psychotherapist in private practice who works with queer and transgendered communities in Portland, Oregon. Isaiah received his master's in social work from New York University, during which his coursework explored the connections between psychoanalysis, queer theory, critical race theory, and their implications on clinical work. Isaiah views his work through anti-oppressive-based lenses and has trained in various feminist modalities of psychotherapy that allow for the use of transference-based work. Additionally, Isaiah is an eating disorder survivor with a particular interest in the intersections between gender dysphoria, exercise addiction, and eating disorders. This episode is amazing. Isaiah shares details of his story, and it really is quite vulnerable with sharing what he went through transitioning and how that affected his relationship with his body. And I think you're going to learn so much from hearing his story and the gaps that we have when we talk about body positivity and how we can make it more inclusive. It's a really powerful interview, so I think you're going to love this one. Check it out. Hello, Isaiah. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you.
I am so happy to have you here today. Thank you so much for taking the time. I'm really excited to have you share your story.
Yeah.
So why don't we start off with that? I would love you to tell our listeners a little bit about your story and how you got to where you are today doing the work that you do.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So I'm a trans person, and I feel like my story sort of like really kind of starts there with like coming out as trans and my relationship with my body. And, I actually feel really fortunate that of course I grew up with problematic messages around my body and things like that, but actually not to the extent that I feel like a lot of people that are socialized as female do. And so I feel like there are some ways that I was sort of like spared some of that. But I started coming out as trans when I was probably 18. And so just to put that in perspective, that was 13 years ago. And, not that things are perfect and necessarily where they should be now in terms of the trans right movement and accessing healthcare and things like that. But when I was coming out as trans, there was no YouTube, right? There weren't like big public figures that we have that are out as trans in the same way that we do now. And so that was something that was really hard and confusing for me. And so I started coming out as trans when I was 18. And then, I don't know, it was a very sort of confusing time because I'm also like in college, right? And going through all of these other sort of like fun, developmentally challenging struggles of just like, who am I in the world and like, what do I want to do? And I'm also, been giving myself shots of testosterone in the bathroom of my dorm at my college. That's the first all women's college in the country. And so
Wow.
sort of navigating all of these things. But I would say, that I think it's interesting, as a trans person and then as a therapist who's working with trans people, I think that a trap I end up seeing a lot of trans people falling into is this idea that you can sort of change anything about your body, right? And so, physically transitioning and starting hormones and accessing surgery and things like that can be this like really cool, exciting experience of being like, it's like Christmas every morning, talk about a like time when you're really like hyper focused on your body, right? And so I have these memories of being like 19 years old and like, sitting in the mirror or sitting in the bathroom, like sitting on the counter and like leaning so close into the mirror to like look for like peach fuzz on my face, and I'm like hitting the actual mirror, but it's just like can be this incredibly exciting time for your body because it's like every morning is like Christmas and it's like what's going to be different, even though the reality is it's like those things like actually really take a long time. It doesn't necessarily feel like that in the moment. And so it was definitely, but then you get this idea, like hormones, especially for transmasculine people like myself, like testosterone can really change a lot of things about how you look. And it just totally depends on the person. There's no, guarantee that these things are going to happen, but they can certainly do a lot. And so I think the trap that I fell into that I unfortunately see a lot of people in my community fall into is this idea that you can change all of these aspects of your body, right? And so you get used to this idea that like, oh, well, if I can grow a beard, right, then I can change all of these other things in my body that are not necessarily changeable. So for me, what that ended up looking like, so, one of the biggest things for me was being able to access top surgery, which is, people refer to, chest surgery, double mastectomy, use your imagination, my tits got chopped off,
Right.
that's essentially what's happening. And so that was sort of like the big thing for me. But then I think, a couple of years into hormones and top surgery and things like that, I think I was still really disconnected from my body and disconnected in terms of my relationship with food. And I definitely knew, like looking back, growing up and sort of like understanding this as a therapist, that I was an emotional eater and looking at the ways that my parents related to me in terms of food and things like that. Like there are a lot of sort of like those seeds that were there. And then it was really, I would say like my sort of like really big struggle around my eating disorder started, probably 6 years ago in 2012. And I, had struggled with my weight and mainly more around the shape of my body. That's where a lot of my dysphoria and challenges and where it can be for a lot of trans people. And so my body is very curvy. And that's something that is just really hard for me because no matter how much I like intellectually know that that like gender is like so deeply socially constructed, it's still like a lived reality, right? Like money, like capitalism isn't real, or like money isn't real, but I still have to pay rent, right? So like these things are so deeply socially constructed, and they still have these incredible impacts on us. And so I, really struggled with the shape of my body, and that all of my fat is on my hips and on my sides. And for some people, taking testosterone changes that. For other people, it doesn't. And that wasn't something that changed for me, and that was something that I had really wanted and hoped for. And it was definitely confusing, I think, to see all of these other parts of my body change, and to see that I was sort of becoming myself and coming into my body in all of these ways, and then have this other part of me feel like it was just like stuck and not going to do anything. And so just, I'm kind of an intense person in the sense of like, I go like all out for things. And so it was in the summer, and I had never been somebody who exercised regularly. I grew up, which people who meet me now, I'm a really active person, and I love being outside, and that's a huge part of my identity and who I am. And so people, tend to have this image of me that I was always this very active and athletic person, and that's like couldn't be farther from the truth. I grew up skiing, which was something that I loved and was always really good at, but that was like kind of it, And so I literally just like decided like overnight, that I was going to like quote unquote get healthy. Right.
Right.
And so, like danger zone immediately, and so I had never really been like, I just didn't think about what I ate, and what I was putting into my body. And then I had this period of, so I knew that I, wasn't eating in ways that were sustaining me emotionally or nutritionally. And I completely changed the way that I ate, like overnight.
Wow.
Like I went from eating, a lot of like processed food and a really like meat and carb based diet to, becoming a pescatarian and vegetarian and then eventually vegan. And I went from somebody who never exercised to literally I got this like indoor recumbent bike for my house because I was so afraid of exercising in public, right? And like what that would look like and feel like in my body, like it just felt so vulnerable that I got this bike. And I remember I just became completely addicted to it. And I remember discovering that I could go 20 miles on it. And just this like incredible, like really like physiological high from that, and feeling so accomplished and feeling, I mean, the biggest thing was feeling really connected to my body. And so the difficult thing was then that highlighted how much of my life I had spent really disconnected from my body, that it ended up feeling like the only time I could really be present and experience positive parts of positive aspects of my body were when I was exercising. And so, I lost almost 20 pounds like in a month, and it felt really good. And I think I felt a lot of that sort of like high that I got when I first started physically transitioning. I think I started to feel really similar ways, and I got a lot of attention, and then, like got really into biking and, sort of became this like freak athlete overnight. And it's hard because when I look back on it, even still now, like there are parts of that I like miss, because it was this like incredible feeling of like triumph and this like feeling of like control and connection and all of these things, but it was really compulsive and it's really harmful. And there were times, I had just graduated from social work school and, I'm at my first job. And I remember, there were times when I didn't know if I was going to get my bike ride in for that day. And I was so panicked about it that I would just leave. Or there would be, a Halloween party where people were going to have cupcakes and I just couldn't do it. Like I just left because I was having a panic attack, and my whole world became consumed with food. And I really thought that if I lost enough weight, then the shape of my body would change. And so at this point, I was really trying to starve my hips away. But that isn't something that you can change with weight loss, or at least not for me and for my body. And so I just deflated in the same really curvy shape and just became so consumed with my body and exercise. I would only eat certain foods that I had eaten in the process of losing weight. And so I created this narrative around poison, that certain foods and entire food groups and things like that were poisonous and were going to contaminate my body. And eventually decided that hormones were going to contaminate my body. And I had stopped taking testosterone at certain points in my transition, which is really common for a lot of people. So it's not something that's rare and wasn't rare for me. But for me, I didn't even want to be on testosterone because some of the side effects of that are weight gain. And stopped taking hormones completely for a year because I was just I cannot have anything that isn't pure in my body.
Wow.
Yeah, I was really I was in it. And it was a really hard, confusing time. And I really feel for the people who were around me at that time. And some of them, I got a lot of attention, a lot of it really positive. And so that was hard to thinking about giving up, and a lot of people were really Isaiah, we are concerned about you. I lost a third of my body weight in one summer.
Yeah, that's intense.
Yeah, it was a lot. And I realized, a few months in that I had an eating disorder, but I just didn't want to give it up. It felt like I had, I remember talking with, eventually my therapist and then, eventually a nutritional therapist and just being my body talks to me when I'm hungry. And it was this and, and I just didn't want to give it up. And because then I would have to face that I actually can't control my body and I can't control the shape of it. I can't control, my hormones, that's just not possible. And so it took me probably a year, I would say just under a year and a half to enter nutritional therapy. And so an interesting part of my story too is that veganism actually really saved me in terms of my eating disorder. And I know that this can be a really controversial thing in terms of eating disorder recovery, and that, for a lot of people, veganism can be a form of restriction. And for me, it was really, I'm a super political person and, intersectionality really means a lot to me. And so, when I became vegan, it really, maybe there were parts of it that were about restriction, but it also gave me permission to eat and gave me a reason to eat at a time when I was starving, right? And so food was this thing that was so stressful and complicated and that I just didn't care about. And then I started getting into veganism and animal rights, and I was oh my God, a reason to eat, right? This might feel really shitty some of the time, but I know that this is also this political decision and that I can do something productive with something that's causing me a lot of suffering. And veganism actually for me was kind of the pathway out of some of my restriction and, like discovering new types of foods and things like that. And so with that, of course I like started eating again. And so I started gaining weight, which I needed to. And I then, when I discovered going to the doctor and being weighed after what I affectionately refer to as my like summer of love, when I was just like eating like all the best vegan desserts you can imagine. And then I discovered I gained weight and I just broke down again and was just like, fuck, like I'll never forget like, like sitting outside, like I was living in Boston, Massachusetts at the time, and sitting outside on the like curb of the like queer health center there, just like crying and not knowing what to do. And it was really hard for me as a therapist to try and seek out treatment. It was hard as a trans person. And I just, I started looking into these places, and eventually, I would call saying that I was looking information for clients when I was really looking for myself. And all of these programs were geared at women. And they were all very behaviorally based programs, which, I mean, first of all, as a therapist is like not really my jam to begin with either.
Right.
And I just had no idea how to access those spaces, right? But I obviously like recognized the importance of them, but I just felt so invalidated and unseen as a trans person, and I was just like, there's just no way I can like put myself in this like very sort of like stale treatment environment. And so I really lucked out in terms of like finding a nutritional therapist who like took my insurance, which like, oh my God, never happens, and then also who was approaching things from an intuitive eating framework, and saw her for probably 6 or 7 months before I moved to the West Coast, and just went and talked about my body and how much I hated the shape of it and how I just didn't know what to do, and I would just like sit there and she would just, like sometimes I'd just be starving and she would just like feed me trail mix, and she was great. And I was her first trans client, and she got it. And I think that people are really intimidated about working with trans people, and I totally understand that. And like sometimes I'm like, yeah, you should be like, do your homework, and other times it's also like we're like people, and if you're a good therapist or clinician and provider and like using like your basic clinical skills, then like you're gonna be okay. And she was really great. I don't think, I look back on it and I feel like in the beginning of my treatment, it was just sort of like all like washing over me. I didn't really know what to make of it, but like here's this person like preaching about like intuitive eating and like how you're born an intuitive eater and all these things. I was just like, okay, whatever, And yeah, and that was sort of like the beginning of my recovery and my journey. And, in that time, I ended up moving out to the West Coast, which was a really great life decision as it like fit perfectly within like my interests in terms of like being outside. And ended up, and so then I started, I'm gaining the weight back and things like that, but I'm not as like fixated on the weight itself. But then of course the weight I'm gaining back is all going to my hips.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just like, like why? Like I've like done all this therapy. I am a therapist, like why can't I just accept my body? And I think one of the hardest things too was like, being a person who's queer and really really involved and active in political queer spaces that fortunately oftentimes are really invested in body positivity and fat positivity. I felt like I had really betrayed my community and was really like, oh my God, I am this like radical queer feminist who's like freaking out about their weight, like what is wrong with me? Like it just like felt like this like other way that I just like couldn't get my shit together.
Oh, so you're putting pressure on yourself to be kind of like the perfect representation of feminism.
I just felt living up to my politics, which is like not fair either, right?
No.
And so I eventually, it was really complicated. I had sort of like looked into like surgery options when I was living in Massachusetts in terms of like changing the shape of my body. And, it's hard and it's messy. And I think for a lot of trans people, obviously not everyone, but for me, in order to like get to a better place with my body, I've had to change it in some really drastic ways. And so the next steps for me in terms of changing that were having liposuction twice to remove fat from my hips. And oh my God, I felt so horrible about it at first. I just, again, I was like, why can't I just like accept this? But realized that I just couldn't and that was okay. And I'll never be able to like tease out what fat phobia, was in those decisions, but I'm also not defined by it at the same time, and so I, decided to have more surgery, and it was really complicated, but I was also just like, my relationship with my body was not sustainable, like that's just like not good, So I ended up going and I had liposuction removed from, the sides of my body to create a more sort of rectangular masculine shape. And then I decided a couple of years later that I like actually wasn't happy with the results and that I like wanted to do it again. And then at this point, I remember like texting my friends and being like, oh my God, like, am I just like addicted to plastic surgery?
Yeah. Like, was it the same kind of
like something that like a lot of like trans people struggle with? And, but like, why are we like lapsing into these like, yes, it's important to like think critically, but those are like, why are we like creating more binaries when like shit's way more complicated than that, And having those two surgeries were like life-saving for me, and it's messy and complicated. And that was what I needed to do to live and exist in my body in a way that is sustainable. And those decisions to ironically, have fat removed from my body were really central points of my recovery because it just, like, I don't know that I'll ever get to a place where I truly like love my body, but I feel like I have so much appreciation, for people that are out there that are like talking about like radical self-love and are like, don't stop at acceptance, and like, that's like great. And like, I hear you and I'm not there, and I think that's like, and so the place that I talk about where I'm like at right now with my body is like, good enough, right? Like I have a functional relationship with my body, and like where I'm at right now. And I recognize that there's like totally possibility for growth and change in that. And like, maybe I'll get there, but right now, like I'm going to fucking celebrate that I got to good enough, because like there was like a hell of a lot of pain that came before that,
Yeah, well, it's so much more compound. It's not just fat phobia, it's the whole, it's the whole gender aspect of it too that really, that makes your story so much more unique. And I think the struggle that much harder.
Yeah, because it's like, it's not just fat, right? Like this is like very gendered fat,
Yeah.
And it's like, like I have like feelings about, like having gained weight back and stuff like that, but it's also like I know that my feelings about the fat on my stomach or my face and things like that are nowhere near the intensity that I experienced in terms of like having fat on my hips and the sides of my body. Just like to me it just like feels so different.
Yeah. Well, wow. I really appreciate you being so vulnerable and sharing all the details of what you've experienced, because it's such a powerful story. And I think sometimes, we look at things in the body positive movement from a very, binary perspective. And it's like, this is okay and this is not okay. Like it's not okay to change your body to conform to society standards. But, hearing your story, It's just like, it's just really kind of, opened my eyes to a whole other
Yeah, and I mean,
angle.
even like within like trans community too, like there's this like hierarchy of dysphoria, and I do see that sort of like shifting now in some ways, which is great and really, powerful to sort of witness those shifts happen. But it's like people can understand like, okay, you don't want breasts or you don't want this genitalia. It's like are, you know, I feel like had been these like again these like acceptable areas of dysphoria, right? But then like talking about like shape and things like that, it's like a dialogue that is like happening now that like had been very forbidden until recently, and now it's like I like see it so much more in my practice with the clients that I work with, with like trans masculine folks, like and the trans women that I work with, like really talking about like dysphoria in terms of the shape of their bodies. And insurance companies have gotten better about covering some trans-related surgeries and unfortunately much more often for trans masculine people because the way that, trans misogyny plays itself out in terms of covering surgeries is just absolutely horrible. But this is not something that insurance companies cover. Like I've paid for all of my surgeries on my own.
Yeah. Wow.
So yeah. Yeah. So then it's like, then we get these like, or had beginning these like community messages of like, oh, that's like not dysphoria, right? These are the acceptable forms of dysphoria. And then that gets reinforced by insurance companies who, have these like lovely ideas about trans people's bodies and lots of other people's bodies. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, the whole body image piece is just so complex, I think, because of all of these different factors coming into play. This episode of Fearless Rebel Radio is brought to you by Tomboy X. I love that Tomboy X makes kick-ass gender-neutral underwear for all people and all bodies, all sizes, and all skin tones. Tomboy X makes amazing underwear for people whose opinions are anything but. My personal favorite product is the bralette because they are the best ones that I've worn. They are extremely comfortable, soft, and look super cute when you have them on. For the first time, I found underwear that doesn't just fit me, it gets me and feels so good on my body. It's time to stop wearing underwear that doesn't make you feel confident. No more underwear with more frills than function. No more underwear your mom got you to fem you up. Get underwear that's made to fit you and how you see yourself. They have bikinis, briefs, boxer briefs, trunks, and boy shorts, soft bras, racerback bras in everyday basic colors, fun seasonal prints, and brilliant colors. All options come in extra small to 4X. Regardless of where you fall on the size or gender spectrum, Tomboy X offers amazing underwear that any body feels comfortable in. Go to tomboyx.com/fearless and check out their special bundles and pack pricing. And Fearless listeners get an extra 15% off with code FEARLESS. Again, enter code FEARLESS for an extra 15% off. Ditch whatever you've been wearing for a pair of Tomboy X underwear. Go to tomboyx.com/fearless. Yeah. And I know I've read that, something that doesn't get talked about a lot is transgendered people. They're 4 times more likely to have an eating disorder. That's the stat that I read. I don't know if that's still.
Yeah, I mean, that seems unfortunately low, if you ask me. I feel like it's like way higher than that. And I think that people really, it is this really tangible way for people to work through or attempt to work through these issues, around control or to avoid, dealing with and confronting really challenging parts of their relationships with their bodies.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's so hard in a society that is so oppressive towards trans folks. That makes it so much harder to reach out for help. And then, as you said, like all the programs you looked into were geared towards women. And so I think it's even more difficult to even realize that you have a problem or seek out treatment when you do.
I know. And it's so hard though, because it's like, that's important, right? Like those spaces and the way that fat phobia and oppression around bodies and things like that, like the way that impacts women, like that is very, very different, right? And so it's like, I want to recognize the significance and importance of those spaces. And I also want to like have more narratives that are there,
Yeah,
you know? And so
absolutely.
like trying to find a balance for that is just really challenging.
So I'd love to talk to you a little bit about, like the body positive movement and what your thoughts are on, what messages you feel are problematic or not, I guess, with what you see out there.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because I feel like it's sort of like a movement that I'm like just coming into. And I feel really lucky to be living in Portland, Oregon, which is this like incredible hub of body positivity. I mean, the things that people are doing here are really great and really amazing. And so it's interesting because I feel like what had sort of like put me off in the beginning was what I feel like is this sort of like false body positivity that's very like, and I mean, I can be like kind of an in your face person too. So I have an appreciation for the like, fuck you mentality. But it was this very like, I don't know, it felt almost like forced, of like, yeah, we're so like radical and like fuck your norms and standards and like I'm gonna eat this cake because I'm done with you policing me and all that stuff. And like there is a time and place for that, and that's great. And also like just eat the cake because you want to, like not because, like not because it has to be this like other like big thing. Just like do it, And so I feel like I am like just starting to like that, and that has been really great and healing. But I also like know that this doesn't happen everywhere, and I feel like I just like moved to the right city and to the right coast and met the right people.
Yeah, it's a good city.
I think that there's a part of me that still tenses up when I hear people talking about radical self-love and things like that, because I also want it to be okay to not get there. And I think there are people that are in those movements that are saying that, but I think I sometimes wish that came across more or was more like explicit and clearly communicated that, where you are now is totally okay, And I just, so I think some of my frustration is just, like wanting there to be more space for those of us who are just like, my relationship with my body is like functional and that's okay,
Yeah, and I've also heard like that's problems with messages like, love your body as it is when your body isn't the way you want it to be. Like
Oh
it's
yeah,
like
really
that.
hard for trans people.
Yeah, can you talk about that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting though, because I say that and I'm like, oh, am I making this like all about trans people? When really like, cis people struggle with that too. But yeah, I mean, I think that's just a hard pill for a lot of trans people to swallow, And I think that like if we're going to be working towards like body liberation and all of these things, like we really have to recognize that that means really different things for a lot of different people. And for some people, that means changing our bodies, and that, for me meant having liposuction, and that's a really like uncomfortable thing for a lot of people, and was like life-saving for me,
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you feel like there needs to be more of?
I think we just like really have to, I mean, just like embrace messiness, and that like these are not dichotomies, like it's not either, like you're like so liberated and like, like radical self-love, or you're this like, product of like our oppressive, fucked up culture. Like there's like so much in between, And I want to say too that I actually think that I have hope for people to get that messiness, because I see how people have been able to move away from other dichotomies, around gender and stuff like that. And I'm like, okay, this is just, like there's just some learning curves here.
I think it's so true. Like we have to see that things, don't just like switch on and switch off. And it's not like all of a sudden you just, trust your body or you don't. Everything really happens in a messy, non-linear way. And I think, yeah, you're totally right. There has to be space for just, my body is functional. And I think I've heard this when I've had conversations with disabled people as well, like that it's just,
Yeah.
it's like, I'm not going to love my body. Like, like that is just an absurd notion for me. And so, I have to kind of think about another way, we have to think about ways to express that message that are more inclusive to other individuals and their struggles.
Yeah, I think the hard thing is, it's like anybody who's living in a body that is marginalized, it's like we fight so hard to be seen and to be seen like through our own experience and not like a dominant narrative experience, right? And so it's like, I think we can be like so sensitive, rightfully so, to those experiences of erasure. And so I think, that some of that language like can just feel really erasing,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so important to note. I quickly, before we wrap it up, I want to talk to you about the concept of body trust for you. Like I know when I heard you speak, you were saying that like you can tell me in your own words, what did you think when you first heard the expression body trust?
Yeah, I mean, so when I first heard that, I was just like, oh no, like this is just not gonna happen. Like this is some like, cis person's great invention of what they think is gonna be good for me. I mean, but I love the nutritionist that I saw, and she was like, oh shit, like I was just going to work with trans people, and it was great. And so we were able to talk about it. And so I really value and appreciate that. But I think that it is, I think unfortunately for me, some of my relationship with body trust is really compartmentalized, right? And so there are aspects of my body that I do feel really able to trust and that I do connected with. And, one of the things that will sort of like remind me of that is like, like having an injury or something like that. And then like, those are these like really amazing opportunities to look at how my body like actually is really working on my behalf and is like fighting so hard to heal me in these really cool ways. But so I feel like I've had to sort of like be much more like flexible about what that looks like, and that it doesn't have to be, again, like moving away from these dichotomies, right? That it doesn't have to be that like you're trusting everything about your body every day, because that's going to leave so many people out, like trans or not, but being able to embrace those parts that like you are able to trust, that I do think there's capacity for people to find those sort of like individual linkages,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's such a good way of putting it, that it can be really flexible, and it's not just like you don't have to trust every single thing. You get to choose.
Yeah, I mean that's just not realistic for anything.
Yeah,
like that's not sustainable. I don't think. For me, I'll speak for myself. For me, that's not sustainable. That it's that like really like rigid thinking that like ended up with me losing a third of my body weight in one summer, so like I'm trying to move away from those types of things,
Yeah. So what are some practices that you do, or things that like are you still kind of turn to or lean on to help you in this journey that we're all still on, but that you're still on? Yeah.
I think the hard thing is that I, and this is something that I worry about, is I think a lot of the way that I'm able to have, the trust and positive experience with my body is through exercise, and still being a really active person, but in a like really different way, and like nowhere near as much of a compulsive way. But then, I think the pitfall of that is that I'm like, oh, well, when I can't do this, right? Like, how am I going to offer my body the same like love and appreciation if it's not able to climb mountains or ski or surf or like all the things that I do,
Yeah.
So that's something that, to be honest, like I just haven't figured out yet,
Mm-hmm.
and I think those are going to be like some hard times of figuring that out.
It is a really difficult thing. People who identify with being an athlete or being with movement being a big part of their identity, I think, it sounds like you've done a really good job to heal your relationship with it. And it's not that same, compulsive, it's not coming from that destructive, compulsive place. But yeah, it is. It's tough. I mean, that's a big question is like, okay, well, what would happen if I were injured and I couldn't do that? Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard. It's messy, and I'm not there yet.
Yeah, which is good. There is no there, right? Like, and I think I really appreciate
totally.
You being so open about the fact that, that you're still working through these things.
Oh, no. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. I mean, we're all working through our own stuff. We just, we don't just, not a lot of people talk about it. We all just kind of want to like show like, I'm there.
They're like, that's where body positivity like needs to do better, is to sort of like expose its own messiness, right? And I think that one of the hard things though is that like, it's like, I don't know, when we see like how like scary and fucked up, our culture is around bodies, and it's like, we really want to like go in and like quickly intervene and like change that, And so it's like, I don't know, it's like you can feel like you've got your like one article or one, like social media post or like one thing that, like there's so much pressure there, but actually like, it doesn't, I don't know. There's so much pressure to sort of like respond to these like problematic things that I think it can like force us into these like oversimplified, more, sort of like rigid ideas of like what body positivity really is,
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, we could talk about so much more that has to do with this, but I know we have to wrap things up here. So I just want to thank you so much again, and have you share where can people find more of you?
I mean, you can just go to my website, and, people are totally welcome to reach out or shoot me an email or things like that. Yeah.
Great. That's awesome. Are you on social media at all? Or are you like,
yeah, I mean, I one of my sort of like goals or to do is to like add like a blog component of my website and to like make a like sort of like professional social media presence, but that's sort of like a like summer goal.
Yeah. Yeah.
So right now, like you can reach out to me like personally on social media.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I look forward to, if you do start that blog or have that social media presence, because I think you have a lot of really great stuff to say, and I'm so glad that you came on my radar and that you took the time to share your story and your perspectives on everything today. It was really, really refreshing and fantastic. I really appreciate you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Of course.
Rock on. I learned so much from my conversation with Isaiah that was really, really powerful. And it was awesome to just hear his entire story in that much detail. And just really different perspectives on things than we've had on the show before. So really awesome. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you so much for listening. I will talk to you next time. Rock on. I'm Summer Innanen, and I want to thank you for listening today. You can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Summer Innanen. If you haven't yet, go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this show. I would be so grateful. Until next time, rock on.